Space Funeral is weird, quirky, a bunch of other synonyms for wacky. What exactly defines weird is up to your interpretation, but most would agree it's a real three-meat treat of surrealism, a heavy dose of unconventional storytelling, and a certain swagger or aura to it that makes it a delectable pizza pie for any gamer interested in going off the charted path. There are only so many things you can get away with for regular developers who need studio backing to make a game for a console. You need a team, and mo people, mo problems. It may seem like you could publish anything on the PS2 back in the day, but even Sony at their edgiest wouldn't let Manhunt 2 be printed unmolested. There were restrictions and limits and copyright, so many entangling webs to get caught in and laws to obey. Therein lies the beauty of indie developers. If you're one man making a game entirely on your own using something like RPG Maker, something so creatively enabled and free-form, there are basically no limits to what you can create outside of technicality. And we've seen time and time again how small RPG Maker games have radically shifted video games as a medium, and none are more obviously off-color than Space Funeral. This isn't a game you should describe with adjectives you obtain from a thesaurus like I just did, but by example. This is a game where you can catch a wild steak to give to a talking lion, a game where you can get into a fight with the crowned king of crime, and a game where you leave your comfy home of Scum Village with your friend made entirely out of severed legs to find out why society's become so putrid and ugly. Just as strange as the game itself is its developer, known as thecatimites, who has been around the internet for some time now, has created several games under his Longwear umbrella. Trying to decipher meaning from his games might be impossible, but it seems like everyone who's ever tried to has come out inspired, because Space Funeral is one of the most influential RPG Maker games ever made, an impressive feat for a free game. What this video aims to do is try and explain Space Funeral, as fruitless as it might seem, and to shed some light on what Space Funeral later inspired, and also document what thecatamites has been up to for all these years. It's kind of intimidating to give this game the analytical spotlight it deserves, but it's all the more reasons to like this video and sub to the channel for this preposterous task. Especially if you like the coverage of these fun little RPG Maker games, or more obscure horror or atmospheric titles, some lesser loved RPGs, or if you just want to throw me a dime on Patreon. Huge thanks if you're part of the Jawcoin supporter tier, you get your name in the video. But you know what's even more intimidating? Using public internet, which is something I didn't have to do as I typed up the script at McDonald's thanks to today's sponsor, Surfshark VPN. We all know what a VPN is, or virtual private network, but what can it do for you? Well, for starters, it protects you from public Wi-Fi, which is host to all sorts of unsavory characters who can pretty easily access your information if you don't have any protection. This protection makes sure your private information stays private. Secondly, you can freely change your location to nearly anywhere in the world, which lets you access content that is normally unavailable for your location for some reason. Take that, draconian arm of copyright and licensing. I can watch Arrow and Netflix now that I've changed my location, and there's nothing you can do about it. Thirdly, their customer support is second to none. It's 24 hours, 7 days a week, and if you don't like what you're getting, there is a 30-day money-back policy, no questions asked. I have a coupon code called SharkPeter that you can use to get 4 months totally for free. With the world being so online now, you're gonna want protection to keep you and your information safe, and Surfshark are the folks that can help you with that. Check out my link in the description for that promo code. Back to the video. There is no better way to show both what kind of game Space Funeral is and who thecatamites is as a creator than the title screen of the game. Okay, let's try to make some sense of whatever's going on here. All of our options are blood. This whatever this is the face we're greeted with, and we get an earful of the music. It's part of the default RPG Maker 2003 sound pack, but it's common practice to avoid using default assets or sounds in order to not seem like you put no effort into your project, to stand out from the crowd. Space Funeral has no interest in standing out or not, but rather performing a bunch of bizarre interpretive movements and not caring if you look too deeply into it or not. 3 separate blood options are more complicated than it seems. It's just your standard options for new game, load game, and quit. To ask why these options are all labeled blood might miss the point, whatever that point may be. Now, let's load into the game and... Okay. Every single one of your senses has just been brutally assaulted with a hideous blitzkrieg. Just look at this game. There is some dastardly pixel art going on here. the likes of which I have not seen replicated in any shape or form. There's no shading, hardly any composition, every pixel feels rogue and out of place. It's hard to even tell what you're looking at half the time. Nothing is colored as it should be, the waters are red, your player character changes color from his overworld sprite to his battle sprite, character models blend into the foreground carelessly. The entire world has this outwardly garish horror aesthetic that makes playing it feel like an interactable nightmare. A dartboard of random objects thrown in with no rhyme or reason. Giant severed heads, blood everywhere. Blood is a very reoccurring thing, as you will see. As for your other senses, you might have found it hard to focus on what I'm saying because of this song playing in the background. The opposite of what your starting town theme should be. Instead of being warm and inviting and comfortable, Scum Village, our hometown, is paired with this dissonant, spacey song that can only theoretically be categorized as rock? Maybe? The song is called White Walking by a Japanese experimental band called Les Rallyes Dénudés. I think that's how you say it? A name that sort of refers to being high while also being naked. A name coined when the band members would wander the streets of Tokyo high on pills. A very appropriate name because this song makes me feel like doing the same. The song perfectly encapsulates a feeling of being in a haze, wandering in an unfamiliar place with a persistent feeling of ennui and mystery. But not the dramatic kind, more of a just got off work and my feet hurt but I need to shop for dinner kind of mystery. I always felt this song was like showing up to high school after you stayed up all night from insomnia, puking after first period, and then having to leave early. That might just be me though. Any video with this song in it has people giving such unique descriptions of a similar uncomfortable, drowsy feeling upon listening to it. It's such an evocative, unique vibe and feeling for our starting area. But why is the case? As I've mentioned, Scum Village is where we start off. This boy, or man, we don't actually know, is named Philip, and he is perpetually crying, 1 year before Isaac did it. Not much else to do in our house than talk to our parents, at least I think they're our parents, collect 25 rubles, and restore health here. Coffins with our own body in it. You feel better, but not by much. Thanks. Scum Village feels like the Koopa Kingdom put through a creepypasta filter. There are giant skulls, spikes, blocks with skulls on them, zombies, and of course, more blood. The entire area screams final boss location, but if your game cartridge was haunted with your dead girlfriend for some reason. Oh, and as for smell, this whole game kinda smelled like that one piece of moldy cheese in Diary of a Wimpy Kid. All of the NPCs speak vaguely in an overtly threatening way, but there is some logic to them. This isn't total chaos with no point. Even these muscle guys tell us some useful info about special items in battle, which should gracefully transition us into the battle system, something we encounter as soon as we leave town. The battle system is deceptively simple. Actually, that's a lie. It is simple. Despite how cryptic and abstract everything else is, the combat is very straightforward, but not to a fault. Our commands are attack, skills, mystery, and item. Attack is exactly what it sounds like, and skills are all of our special abilities, ranging from light health restoration to slightly stronger attacks, or attacks that can hit multiple foes at once. Items are exactly what it sounds like, but some items can be used to deal massive damage, like throwing old movies at ghost enemies, because ghosts are sentimental and tear up to that one song and it happened at the World's Fair. Me too. Or criminals being beaten by throwing Bibles at them. We also have some status effects to play around with. Poison deals damage over time during battles in the overworld, and is one of at least 4 different effects that all deal damage over time to you. There's effects that increase or decrease stats, and do these effects have normal names? Of course not. Blood Rage, Gouge, Brain, all crazy names that still kind of clue us into what they do, but feel distinct and quirky. Moral makes either you or your foe unable to attack, or Spooked makes them slow and lower defenses. Many status effects do the similar things, so the world's your oyster when it comes to planning out battles. We gotta talk about the Mystery command. It can only be used once per battle, and it activates as a completely random effect, ranging from a minor buff in status to outright one-shotting an enemy. It's a complete gamble what you're gonna get, but I find it's heavily skewed in your favor. with the negative effects being very uncommon in my multiple playthroughs. Can it sometimes totally kill the tension during boss fights when you one-shot them? Yeah. Is it still really funny and worth doing? Absolutely. It's like the prayer mechanic in Earthbound, which is funny because the Catamites claimed he didn't play Earthbound until it was, and I quote, too late to take effect. What was outright copied was the active time battle system, ripped straight from Final Fantasy. Each attack makes the bar go down before you get to attack again, different attacks take longer or shorter, and your enemy works the same way. This is a default feature of RPG Maker 2003 though, and not something manually added into Space Funeral. Your max level cap is only 20, which is very meager. You should learn all your useful spells and attacks by then, but you can easily just grind for less than an hour to max everything out and never sweat a fight, but the game's easy enough to not require that. Knowing all this, I'm delighted to tell you that despite how simplistic this all sounds, battling is very, very simple and still fun. Enemies don't have much health, and you always have a chance to exploit a weakness, so losing is not something you will be accustomed to, if you ever do it at all. There are levels and experience points in learning new skills, but it's all very tertiary. Battles are more of an exhibit to see what absurd and hilarious enemy you encounter next, like the land shark, or dog versions of the kamikazes from Serious Sam. I would argue your armor and weaponry are far more important to battle, but I'll talk more about that later. Why are we even leaving the village in the first place? Well, if you talk to our local wizard, he explains that our village has been corrupted because the perfect city, which all things are derived from, has also been corrupted. We have to find another wizard in an area called the Blood Caverns, but that path is filled with beasts, so we need to arm ourselves and grind just a teeny bit. So our village has been corrupted because this other location has been corrupted, strongly implying that this isn't how things are meant to be. Which shouldn't be surprising. I mean, look at this place. But we're off to go find the Blood Caverns, after I grind for some rubles to buy a knife and some armored pajamas from a very rude shopkeep. Not even a few seconds venturing into the wilderness, we do meet, this thing? Okay, this game has no voice acting, but I do like to add some voices into RPG Maker characters. Let's continue that pattern from Hylix.
You worms! You slime! Your barbaric ways are no match for the leg horse! You cringing pus! Join me or die! There is no other way!
This bundle of severed legs forming a horse shape, vaguely, is named Leghorse, and he's our second and final party member. Leghorse doesn't function too differently from Philip himself, but he can't use the mystery command. He's more so just a second attacker and potential heal bot when needed, so his presence isn't ever unneeded.
Perhaps I underestimated you. Your name is Philip, eh? I am Leghorse. From now on, you shall obey my every command.
He decides to accompany us. Rather, he thinks we're accompanying him on a mutual journey. Whatever, we take him along to jam to this wacky music. It's not a sound I think I would ever hear in a video game, but Space Funeral is nothing if not unconventional, and perhaps nowhere more strongly is it pronounced than its soundtrack. We got a lot of 70s tracks, as well as very frequent additions from Ruth White, a very obscure artist who produced what I can only describe as dark synth. And you'll be hearing a lot from her later on, because the Catamites wasn't so much inspired by her, but rather just took a 5-finger discount in her Flowers of Evil album. You can either make it to the raft straight away from the northern path of Scum Village, or go east to buy a boat to explore an optional dungeon and fight some kind of horrible DeviantArt dragon creature to obtain powerful weapons early on. Nearly every area in the game has an optional side path that allows you to obtain very powerful weapons and items without buying them, which kind of renders money, and therefore grinding, completely worthless. It's not that the game's systems are unbalanced or broken, but more so optional. You can grind, or explore, or neither if you want a challenge. We finally head north to the raft to get to Blood Cavern. Along the way on the raft, with some very rude people, we see, that.
What is it you say? I heard an old man once refer to it as an error. No one knows what they were originally. Something which broke or which couldn't be translated during the Great Change. In the world we're in now, we cannot even imagine what it might once have been. That shape no longer exists.
It seems there's more than one type of corruption going on in this land. The entire world seems to be all bloody and warped, but some things are so far gone that their true forms are lost to reality, instead being rendered as random glitching textures and tiles pulled from the game's files, which is an amazing concept that really takes advantage of the medium. Think about it, losing your form, which is probably what happened to Leghorse himself. The Great Change is what this event is dubbed, the day the world lost its form. Next stop, Blood Cavern.
When the low, heavy sky weighs like a lid on the spirit, aching for the light.
Instead of a song, we get a spoken poem, once again taken from Flowers of Evil. It's a poem written by this guy named Charles Baudelaire sometime in the 1800s. What the poem actually means, I'm not sure because my education system failed me and did not have poetry as a part of our mandatory English classes, but nevertheless, I find this entire segment disturbing, or maybe perhaps just unnerving. Something about the incredibly harsh and limited palette of black and red, and the distorted, ghoulish voice narrating a poem talking about the decay of the planet and mankind being morally relinquished just bugs me. It's not so much that it's outright disturbing, but entirely unexpected. It's nothing someone could ever really predict or be accustomed to. Space Funeral is so predicated on being entirely unique without having to adhere to traditional game designer influences, and I think the Blood Caverns is the most overt example of that, even beyond Scum Village. It's not that this game takes no inspiration from other games, it's more like it uses those games as templates, and then gets inspiration by learning how to translate fly buzzing and writing the game's story based on what a group of flies surrounding a pile of trash have to say. There aren't any encounters here, we just have to make it to see a wizard to ask some questions about heading to the City of Forms to figure out why the world is the way it is now. We have to let him drink some of our blood though, but only some of our blood, because if you let him do it 3 times, you die, but once or twice is safe. In-game choices are what I like to call stylistically inconsistent, in that some of them might get you killed, while others have a very small change, and sometimes the game likes to troll you. More interesting than the wizard is what we find at the end of the Blood Caverns.
I have reasons of my own for wanting to go there, so we may as well travel together. Besides, I sense a great evil in this cavern.
This monster, like a red and black Gen 1 Haunter sprite, something that would have terrified me at 4 years old. I would have loved to say this encounter terrified me today, but my mystery command made Philip beg for mercy, which instantly killed it. Oops. We enter a desert town called Malice. It's quite the diverse nation, with evil cacti, an army of thieves with names like Break the Bone and Hurl the Stone with motives unknown. We got pig salesmen, mummies who eat flesh, and a knight so rusted he can't move. Malice is quite the diverse area, but it's also home to a ton of future information about later areas, and even some light world building. The town was almost overrun with mummies, until the so-called King of Crime, Rip the Blood, took over and brought his legion of criminals with him to drive it out, but also effectively installing himself as a dictator. All this what now? Goudet. Space Funeral likes to use poor sentence construction and outright typos as stylistic choices, and it's never not funny. Most NPCs tend to be very rude and blunt, with these moyai heads saying stuff like doom and hate and like the video. The shopkeepers here sell all the best armor and weapons in the game, but do not buy anything from here, because a guy will take you to an optional pyramid if you so ask to load your characters up with some of the best healing items, incredible weapons, and armors for free. Philip typically uses knives, but his ultimate weapon is the Zorg cannon. You can usually find Leghorse's boot weapons just kinda lying around. We can also find sentient floating emails that all tell us various unpleasant things, like trust no one, enter the void, and remember to like and subscribe. All very disturbing things to hear. If you ever change your form, inquire the wizard Yorm. Hold on to this for later. Oh, hello, me. We head left to the steak farm, where for 50 rubles we can pick out our own steak, each one with a different personality, like picking a puppy from a mill. Hold on to this for later. We hear some strange rumors about a guy roaming the mysterious forest named 20th Century Boy, but don't worry about that for now. Malice is easily the largest location in the game with the most to do. So you'll be spending an astronomical 10 whole minutes getting everything here, which is quite a long time by Space Funeral standards. I thoroughly enjoyed every minute of it though. We head north to Rip the Blood's castle and... Is that the battle medley from Pokemon? What is it doing here? The word crime is spelled out from the thieves' cigarette smoke. That's ridiculous. We can either rush through the front door of the castle and get accosted by enemies or these heads that do damage upon contact, but they do so little damage that it's totally realistic to just bum rush past them. Or you could go around the side to a secret entrance to release mummies that will storm the fortress and kill everyone. Are you hearing this funky swing theme? I can't get enough of this. We get to Rip the Blood after looting his castle, and he tells us that we can't have the gin lamp he found. He explains the story of the first man he killed. He sets up the location, then it immediately cuts to a battle without him actually telling the story. Just throw a Bible or two at the king of crime, and he is no more. We enter the cave and find the Jin's lamp, and he tells us that he can't do squat for Leghorse's creepy new form, because that can only be fixed at the City of Forms.
You know, I look just like Buddy Holly.
But he can grant one of Philip's wishes, which we get to choose. If you try being altruistic and wish for happiness, you are gifted a crappy self-help book and then turned into a fish for your arrogance. To make it worse, that book isn't even a real item. It doesn't show up in your inventory, you just get gypped. Choosing a desire for power gives you the Zorg Cannon, Philip's ultimate weapon, and your lust for power disgusts Jin so much he turns you into a fish. If you desire money, you get 1,000 rubles on the spot, but because of your greed, yeah, you get it. All three options turn you into a fish, but I highly recommend getting the Zorg Cannon here. 1,000 rubles can be grinded quite easily, so getting the strongest weapon just aids in grinding faster to get that money. We have to meet the wizard, Yorm, who can instantly change you back. Axing that part in RPGs where your party has a major change going on mid throughout the game. Strokes beard discreetly. Heading to the east leads us to the mysterious forest, with a suitably haunting and beautiful melody following us throughout. With such unconventional choices, one would think the music of this game doesn't fit, but since this game is so abstract and surreal, our brains kind of fill in that meaning on their own. So despite how there isn't a consistent genre or tone, it all just works. We can enter Lion Village. It's where all the lions are from. Remember that steak? Dogbone Village. There's not much to do here, unfortunately. Lion hospitality only goes so far. If you stop to collect some elves on the way, we can meet the Elf King, who gives us some new armor, as well as an item that inflicts poison on an enemy that cannot be healed. Pretty good for a 5-second optional task. Up ahead, we get an actual scene of character development.
This was my home. I was not always Leghorse. Before the change, I was Prince Horus. I ruled over the land with my brother, Dag. I like to think I was just a prince. And then, in one terrible day, our peaceful kingdom was turned into a nightmare world, and I into the shape you see now. As for Dag, I never... Wait, did you hear that?
In the moonlight, fighting with the night. It's a ripoff.
What? What? An insult? At my ancestral home? This must be avenged! On guard!
Here is 20th century boy, the wild man of the forest, and he's not too happy with this. He's the hardest fight so far, which just means he deals about 50-60 damage per attack, but he doesn't have much health.
Don't tell me you don't recognize your own brother. Yes, Horus, after the Great Change, the ruin of our kingdom, my new form, I just couldn't take it. I lost my mind, obsessively protecting the house for your return. Parentheses, cough, parentheses. Horus, don't blame yourself. I can see things so clearly now. Continue your quest, Horus. Destroy the cancer at the heart of our kingdom, and avenge me.
I will. Dag, come now, Philip. The northern wastes await.
It feels so strange to see genuine character development and plot progression in this game, but it does have it, even if it's only small hints of it. So, this Great Change event rewrote reality, which affected the Prince brothers Horus and Dag. Horus became Leghorse, and Dag became Mark Bolan. I mean, the song's riff is in the game, so it's as blatant and obvious as one can get with a reference before it becomes actual imitation. So we've heard quite a lot about the City of Forms and the Great Change, but what does that actually mean? Well, the City of Forms is interesting because it's based on real philosophy. You've heard of Plato, right? You don't need to know anything else about him other than the fact he had a theory called the theory of forms, which is easily explained if I asked you to picture a triangle. Can you just picture a triangle in your head? Not a specific triangular object, but just the base or platonic triangle. It's probably gonna look something like this, right? The triangle is a platonic form because it isn't a specific object, but humans just know how to picture a shape that looks like this. There's a lot more to this theory that I can go into, but I've only covered a footnote in it, and I didn't spend enough time in college to sound educated. But I think most of us can understand how humans can picture something without thinking of an exact object in our house to base it off of. Well, Space Funeral makes this theory into a physical, tangible city where all forms and original shapes originated from, essentially making it the genesis, the alpha of life. Something called the Great Change happened, which warped the platonic forms of the city, which affected the entire world of Space Funeral, making it look so warped and evil and deliberately ugly. It's a fun reveal that shows us there was some real thought put into the artistic style, that isn't entirely just for a gag, it's only mostly for a gag. But for now, we enter the frozen wastes. Most ice or snow levels in worlds or games are usually just soft sounding, like they use some kind of harps or flute or whatever to make you feel a little comfortable in the cold. Hearthy. Here, we're in a frozen wasteland filled with giant monsters. Of course, you're gonna feel both lonely and threatened, and there's no better instrument than a musical saw to do that. The theme is as bitter and despondent as the wasteland itself. It's excellent. But despite the cold, I feel like I got to know Leghorse, or Horus, that much better, and his companionship helps keep me warm. What is that? If you get too cold, don't fear, because you can stop by this mansion and meet Dracula. I did not misspeak, I said Dracula. You can engage with a dialogue tree with him, but with only one option each time, just to troll you. So instead of asking him separate questions about objects in his home or about him, you have to do it linearly. Oh, sick. Dracchuff's fat darts? That's awesome. Just a moment ago we were discussing Plato's philosophy, and now we're talking about Dracula passing out from doing poppers in southern Ontario. What other game is like that? There aren't any item shops by this point, because once we entered the waste, there was no going back. Most people were ready to go back in Malice, or the Lion Village if it's the first time they're playing. So this really isn't an issue. Just talk to Outcast O'Bones, the sea dwarf hunter, to get to the City of Forms. Remember what I said about platonic forms and whatnot? Knowing that this city was the apex for the worldly corruption, pibby glitches, if you were born in 2012, it makes sense that the city looks like this. It looks as hard to interpret and as messy as technically possible, with colors deliberately clashing, random tile sets bleeding into each other, and the theme being so appropriately chaotic. There's not much else to do than observe all the warped, ugly forms of the people here and confront the creator of this disaster, Moon.
Greetings, my friends. Welcome to the City of Forms, now formless.
What? Who are you? Can you be?
Yes, I am Moon. It is I who have corrupted the city many years ago. Time passes so queerly in here. I was an artist. I sought perfection in all things. So, seeking to be inspired, I traveled to this city, a place of pure form. It was perfect. It destroyed me. Nothing could be created which was not a pathetic mockery of the objects of the city. The finest works paled in comparison. In the face of such beauty, I felt corrupted. An animal. Our world meant nothing. We were all graceless creatures of slime. I was practically comatose for months when I realized what I had to do.
So you turned the city and world into a grotesque mockery of itself.
Don't you see? The perfection of the city left us impotent. We have to destroy so that we can build again. It's still not enough, you know. Even now, I can feel echoes of that perfect world in the chance permutations of our broken copy. Perhaps another great change, yes, and more until it becomes self-perpetuating, a ceaseless chaos of forms. Perhaps we've had this conversation many times, you and I, with places exchanged.
Perhaps. But it stops here.
Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven, motherfucker!
Well, what else is there to say? They explained it quite sufficiently. Moon is a delusional artist who somehow corrupted this place out of jealousy because her art was imperfect, which ended up warping the world. She ends it with paraphrasing Paradise Lost by John Milton, then getting really mad at us and cursing. Moon is a far more frightening looking enemy than everyone else. She's got this NES Godzilla creepypasta design going on, a bloody, almost draconian monster, and, well, she's still pretty easy. Not a lot else to say other than she deals a lot of damage, but you deal a lot more, so taking care of her is sweet. I do wish we got actual final boss music for her though. I know this game isn't trying to be traditional, but using the same stock and counter theme for her is still pretty deflating for tension. But once she's down, we get her ending. Oh, that's cute. Get it? So before the world was corrupted, it was all RPG Maker 2003 default assets. Then after corruption, it looked like this. How Moon was able to exactly do this isn't important, but I would be remiss if I didn't try and break down her motivation. She was an artist, but felt so invalidated and insecure about her art not comparing to the platonic ideals of the city that not only her art felt lacking, but the entire world did as well. She succeeded, but perhaps she's done this more than once because an ugly, corrupted zombie head still exists. So because of her own insecurities about her own work, she decided to ruin everything for everyone. It might seem strange to claim that Space Funeral has some subtlety to it, but I think there's something very clearly being said here. But to understand that, we need a complete look at the game as a whole. Space Funeral is a wickedly short surreal experience that always leaves you guessing, and manages to be subversive and original in many ways I have yet to see replicated from any other game trying to subvert or deconstruct a genre, even comedically. Space Funeral still has one foot set in reality, so to speak. The visuals, dialogue, character designs are also outlandish and stylistically hideous, but despite the quirky names and effects, the battle system is very straightforward and does little to subvert anything. Buying items is very standard, and NPCs still give hints and dialogue that world builds at least a little bit. This isn't complete anarchy and total nonsense chaos like it might try and present itself. It's not Revenge of the Sunfish, there's a method to the madness, and I think that's what I like most about it. It knows what to change and what not to twist, but also what to keep the same, or at least similar enough to not make the game more frustrating to play. It's like eating freshly baked cookies. It might seem a simple concoction when you eat them, but if you were to observe someone extremely skilled at their craft mix and prepare the ingredients in the exact way they knew and love, you gain serious appreciation for the craft. And brothers and sisters, I thoroughly enjoy the Catamites' tasty treat. The game pulls so many things from evil video game villain layers and puts them almost randomly. The whole world feels threatening, but in that charming Bowser kind of way. I mean, there's evil cacti. How could you not love that? I can't tell if the game is begging to be analyzed, or if there's any deeper meaning at all with most of the decisions. You're just along for the ride. The visceral experience of not knowing what to expect, to explore the environments and getting an unfiltered view into someone's creative palette makes Space Funeral arguably one of the best successors to Yume Nikki out there, which is funny, because the Catamites says he's never played it. The deliberate use of copyrighted music, choosing random monsters, and having ideas so vaguely interested in the time put in here, deciding to make everyone a dick, everything just works. But it isn't without its flaws. It is a very short game. It only took me an hour to see and do everything, and there isn't a lot of variety of things to do, so replay value is a little diminished here. I did feel like the battle system was far too easy, but there were attempts to give opponents specific weaknesses and strategies, and even ignoring the mystery command, which will often just win encounters for you, no one has enough health to last more than 3 minutes in a battle against Philip and Leghorse. I'm not saying to make the game hard, the battles being there as a formality is charming, but maybe just move the needle a little bit more to make them more memorable, you know? But hey, it's free. Doesn't cost me a penny to play this game, and freeware has a way of traveling around. There's still a massive, bloody elephant in the room we need to address. In order to really understand Space Funeral, if there is such a thing, we need to ask the questions, who is the Catamite, and why did he make this game?
It's kind of awkward. It's like you're a musical artist pitching Diddy right now.
Here's my homage to Bahaha. Bahaha.
Independent video game development has never been easier or more accessible than it is at our current date of recording, 2024. Just about anybody with even cursory knowledge of how computers work can make a video game. Some of the most beloved video games of our current decade are made by indie studios, fueled by passion more than money. And undoubtedly, there is no software more famous for its ability to make one-man teams iconic overnight than RPG Maker. Games like Yume Nikki, Aoni, games that make people take indie game development seriously. One of these people who helped contribute to this was Stephen Gilmurphy, otherwise known as the Catamites, an Irish indie game developer who felt frustrated with an especially common belief both in the real world and online, that video games had largely peaked in the 90s and early 2000s. This is something you still hear today. How many diehard PS1 or PS2 or Super Nintendo people do you still hear complaining about modern games? I mean, I also think games peaked in that time period because of output. I mean, all you have to do is post the 2001 PS2 holiday catalog to melt Gen Alpha's brain, but that's neither here nor there. The Catamites felt like people were sticking far too rigidly to this idea, and that many games were all becoming too similar, that no one was really pushing the envelope or even trying to stand out anymore. He was no stranger to making short, abstract, free games simply for the thrill and experience, but he decided to one-up himself and released his most influential and important work, Space Funeral. It was a huge success and became a darling amongst the RPG Maker horror community, even if it wasn't a horror game. It just shared a lot of DNA with Yume Nikki and others, both because they were made on the same engine, but also because both were extremely strong abstractions of their single author's thoughts on the screen. They felt breathtakingly individualistic and fresh, felt inspired by nothing on Earth. People rushed to try and interpret Space Funeral, but that wasn't entirely the intention in mind. There was an interview with him about 11 years ago, and I think I'll just recite it because he says it better than I ever could. How do you feel about people's interpretations, if you've seen them, of Space Funeral? Most people see it as a commentary on RPG Maker's perfect sprites and how most artists who jump into RPG Maker cannot match the perfection. Therefore, it's extremely relatable to anyone who has used RPG Maker and to most artists trying to find their place in art as general. Do you think people are digging too deeply into it, or was that your intention? I haven't really seen many of them. Most of the ones I have assume a level of intention that I didn't really have in mind at the time, like the battles being trivial to make a point about something rather than just being kind of vestigial framework to hang funny stuff on and give the illusion of extra content. But that's okay too. It wasn't so much about the sprites or art in particular of RPG Maker so much as a kind of classist way of dealing with that stuff, which is like the idea that video games reached their peak of output in a few large companies in the 90s, and ever since, it's all anyone can do to ape those things as closely as possible. I think it's probably similar to how people felt in the Middle Ages felt about ancient Greece, but I don't know history, so maybe not. Most of what I like about RPG Maker games comes from the breaks from the tradition, usually in some small way like somebody using their favorite metal song for a battle theme or something. So I guess part of the intent was to show that these kind of slips and distortions and misinterpretations can be more interesting than the formula itself. Like the Cockatoo quote that originality is trying to behave like everyone else without succeeding, although it's semi-purposely not a very original game. Well, you heard it there. The Catamites felt that games simply weren't trying to stand out, so he made Space Funeral as a playful way to protest that, to leave an irrefutable thumbprint on the face of gaming. It wasn't so much that he had a 100% coherent message or theme to say, though there certainly are core ideas being expressed, like how Moon being insecure about her art led to her thrashing the entire Foundation, which I interpret as being commentary on people being afraid to stand out and just let their art be messy, be individualistic. Even the odd music choices are recontextualized because of this reasoning. He wanted to simply stand out and challenge convention, but not in a focused, targeted way, but in a why not way. That's the key to Space Funeral. It isn't bitter or outrageously critical. It's more interested in doing things on its own way because of convention, rather than trying to warp them and outright reject them, something we see quite plainly with characters like Moon. a lot of what makes up Space Funeral was done purely for jokes, but he was inspired by other games. He cites Monster Party on the NES as a visual inspiration for all the blood and violent imagery. Even a casual glance makes me go,
Yeah, kinda.
I'll leave the full interview in the description. Space Funeral came out in 2010, and I talked endlessly about what it inspired, but let me tell you exactly what. It inspired a lot of fan sequels, because imitation is the highest form of flattery. Some of these, like the so-called Space Funeral Part 2 or Legend of the Earthbirth, were liked so much by the Catamites he had declared them canon, but what exactly constitutes as canon to this game is kind of debatable. It's inspired plenty of other games directly, like Hylix, but it also influenced many others in subtle ways. I mean, come on now, look at Undertale. You can't not convince me at least a little bit Toby Fox didn't have his ear to the ground a little teeny tiny bit. Too bad he forgot to make Undertale fun in that process. Space Funeral is something that stood the test of time not only because it's a free game and bleeds charm, but because it exists in that quirky, Earthbound-like RPG sphere with games like Lisa and Not. This genre of wacky, surreal RPGs is a lot bigger than it was in 2010, and Space Funeral beating it to the punch did pave way for future creators to make their own games, because inspiration doesn't always come from imitation or directly lifting an idea or concept, but to put the wind in someone else's sail. The Catamites has done far more than just Space Funeral. He's more than a one-trick developer, because a couple years afterwards, he made this wickedly out-there title called Goblet Grotto, and to sell you on it a very short time, most of the game's text is written in a fictional language you have to decipher from the digital manual, one section which has 200 different decipherable paragraphs to learn the lore, if you want to call it that. It also looks and sounds amazing. There's also Anthology of the Killer, a visual novel of sorts composed of 9 separate games following the adventures of Pibby doing I don't really know actually. You might need to play it yourself to find out, because it's being released on Steam this October. It's been on itch.io for some time now, but come on. If your games aren't on Steam, you aren't gonna get that much attention. But I don't think that's what the Catamites really cares about. He doesn't make games for a monetary career, but for the love of the game, pun not intended. Anthology of the Killer is the first time anything he's ever made has costed money for once, that I know of. He's not so much interested in going against the grain to be edgy, but because he just isn't interested in it. And that's something I have undying respect for. Space Funeral may be his most popular game, but he's got a lot to offer for a solo developer. And his ability to stick to his surreal guns really inspires me, and I know I'm not alone in that, because Philip's exploits are still talked to this day. Even if it isn't as bustling as it once was, RPG Maker games aren't going anywhere, which is good because I plan on covering a lot more, and Space Funeral is partly the reason why. That's all for tonight. Hood Night, Street Dreams.